Miller Blackstone's Patek Philippe watch read exactly 11:55 a.m. when his secretary Rebecca burst into his panoramic 47th floor office, her face paler than the Carrara marble countertops. "Mr. Blackstone," she began, her hands trembling like autumn leaves in Manhattan wind. "Rebecca, I told you I didn't want to be interrupted until your grandmother is coming up." Miller felt the blood drain from his face. Josephine Blackstone, the 89-year-old matriarch who controlled a $3.2 billion empire with an iron fist and a tongue sharper than a razor, had given him a crystal-clear ultimatum 6 months ago: marriage by his 30th birthday, or goodbye inheritance. "What day is it today?" Miller asked, though he already knew the answer. "October 30th, your birthday." "Shit. And where exactly is my fake fiancé that you were supposed to hire?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "The agency said all available actresses are unavailable. Apparently there's a charity event today and—" "All of them?" The private elevator emitted its delicate arrival ding. Miller Blackstone, the man who had transformed small startups into empires, who negotiated million-dollar contracts without blinking, who had a contact list that would make diplomats weep with envy, was officially panicking. His ice-blue eyes swept the office desperately. Flowers? No. Paintings? Obviously not. The window. Well, jumping from the 47th floor would definitely solve the problem, but it was a bit drastic. That's when he saw her. Alice Murphy was on her knees on the floor, scrubbing a coffee stain from the Persian rug that cost more than her annual salary. Her golden brown hair rebelliously escaped from her messy ponytail, and there was a small chocolate stain on her blue cleaning company uniform. "You," Miller said, pointing at her as if he had just discovered the cure for cancer. Alice looked up, her green eyes widening. Sorry, Mr. Blackstone, I'm almost finished here." "What's your full name?" "Alice." "Alice Murphy, sir." "Alice Murphy," Miller repeated, as if testing the sound on his lips. "Do you have a boyfriend?" What?" The elevator doors opened with an elegant whisper. "Perfect," Miller murmured, pulling Alice by the arm and getting her to her feet. "You just became my fiancé." "I what?" Josephine Blackstone entered the office like a queen entering her castle, ebony cane rhythmically tapping the marble floor, dark eyes scanning the environment with the precision of a hawk. "Dear grandson," she said, her voice loaded with false affection and real threat. "Where is she?" Miller took a deep breath, possessively placed his arm around Alice's waist, who was rigid as a statue, and smiled the most radiant smile of his life. "Grandma, I want you to meet Alice Murphy Blackstone, my wife." The silence that followed was so profound that Miller could swear he heard his own heart stop beating. Alice stared at him with an expression that mixed horror, confusion, and something that could be classified as homicidal intent. And it was at that moment, with his hand on the waist of the most extraordinarily ordinary woman he had ever seen, pretending a love that didn't exist for a grandmother who controlled his future, that Miller Blackstone realized he had just started the most complicated lie of his life. "Welcome to hell, Miller," he thought to himself. If only he knew that hell would be so interesting. Alice Murphy had experienced many awkward moments in her 26 years of life. There was the time she'd accidentally walked into the men's bathroom at her high school graduation, the incident when she'd called her professor Mom during finals week, even last Tuesday when she'd tripped and spilled coffee on a businessman's Italian leather shoes. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for being claimed as Mrs. Blackstone by Manhattan's most notorious bachelor, while she was literally on her hands and knees scrubbing his carpet. "I'm sorry," Alice said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But did you just tell your grandmother that we're married?" Miller's grip on her waist tightened imperceptibly. "Play along," he hissed through his $1,000,000 smile, "and I'll make it worth your while." Josephine Blackstone's keen eyes traveled from her grandson to Alice with the methodical precision of a diamond appraiser examining a potentially fake stone. The old woman's Chanel suit probably cost more than Alice's rent for 3 months, and her silver hair was styled in a way that screamed, "I've been rich longer than you've been alive." "Married," Josephine repeated, the word hanging in the air like smoke. "How sudden?" "Oh God," Alice thought. "I'm going to prison for fraud. Do they have Wi-Fi in federal prison?" "It was very romantic, actually," Miller said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. His thumb began tracing small circles on Alice's hip, a gesture so intimate and unexpected that she nearly jumped out of her skin. "I couldn't wait another moment to make her mine." Alice felt heat creep up her neck. This man was clearly insane, but there was something about the way he said mine that made her stomach flutter in the most inconvenient way possible. "And what do you do, dear?" Josephine asked Alice directly, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer and found it amusing. Alice's mind went completely blank. What did wealthy wives do? Shop? Get manicures? Discuss the stock market? "Alice runs her own consulting business," Miller jumped in smoothly. "Very exclusive clientele. She's quite particular about her cleaning methods." Did he just call me a cleaner in front of his billionaire grandmother? Alice's eye twitched. Meanwhile, from his corner office 3 floors below, Theodore Teddy Worthington III adjusted his vintage glasses and smiled like a cat who'd just discovered a mouse convention. As Miller's former Harvard roommate and current business rival, Teddy had been monitoring the Blackstone inheritance situation with the dedication of a soap opera fan. "Oh, this is absolutely delicious," Teddy thought, pulling up Alice Murphy's employment records on his computer. Miller Blackstone, the man who's never been seen with the same woman twice, suddenly married to a cleaning lady? The press is going to have a field day, and when dear Josephine discovers the truth. He picked up his phone and speed-dialed page 6. Time to stir the pot a little. After all, what are old friends for? Back in Miller's office, Josephine was studying Alice with the intensity of a scientist examining a new species. "Tell me, Alice," Josephine said, settling into one of Miller's leather chairs as if she owned the place, which technically she did. "How did you two meet?" Alice opened her mouth, then closed it, looking remarkably like a fish gasping for air. "Coffee shop," Miller and Alice said simultaneously. "Elevator," Miller corrected at exactly the same moment Alice said. "Library." Josephine's eyebrow arched so high it nearly disappeared into her hairline. "It was a coffee shop and a library with an elevator," Alice said desperately. "Very architectural." Miller closed his eyes briefly, possibly praying to whatever deity protected lying grandsons. "How long have you been married?" Josephine continued, clearly enjoying herself now. 6 months, Miller said. 2 weeks, Alice said at the same time. 6 months, 2 weeks, Alice corrected quickly, her cheeks burning. "Time flies when you're happy." Miller squeezed her waist again, and Alice was mortified to realize that despite the absurdity of the situation, her body was responding to his touch in ways that had nothing to do with acting. "Where's your ring?" Josephine asked sweetly, the question landing like a bomb. Alice's left hand instinctively moved behind her back. Miller's face went through approximately 17 different expressions before settling on what he probably hoped was loving devotion, but looked more like mild constipation. "It's being resized," he said weakly. "Both of them?" Josephine gestured to Miller's equally naked ring finger. "We're very modern," Alice offered helplessly. Josephine stood up, her cane tapping ominously against the marble. "Well, this has been illuminating. I expect to see you both at the charity gala tonight. 7 o'clock, grand ballroom at the plaza." She paused at the elevator. "And Alice, dear, do try to find something appropriate to wear. I have a reputation to maintain." The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, leaving Miller and Alice alone in the suddenly too quiet office. They stood frozen for exactly 30 seconds before Alice whirled around to face him, her green eyes blazing. "Are you insane?" she exploded. "I'm not your wife. I don't even know your middle name. I clean toilets for a living, and you just told your terrifying grandmother that I'm sophisticated enough for a Plaza Hotel charity gala." Miller ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, making it slightly less perfect and somehow more attractive. Look, I can explain. Explain? Explain? Alice's voice rose to a pitch that probably disturbed dogs in neighboring buildings. You just ruined my life. What happens when she finds out the truth? What happens when everyone finds out the truth? I'll be blacklisted from every cleaning company in Manhattan. That won't happen, Miller said, his voice gentler than she expected. I promise. Your promises mean nothing to me. I don't even know you. Miller James Blackstone, he said quietly. My middle name is James. I'm 30 years old as of today. I hate olives, I'm allergic to shellfish, and I haven't had a relationship last longer than 3 months since college because I'm apparently an emotionally unavailable workaholic with commitment issues. Alice stared at him, momentarily thrown by his honesty. And right now, Miller continued, you're the only thing standing between me and losing everything my family has built for generations. So please, Alice Murphy, will you help me? The way he said her name, like it was something precious instead of common, made her chest tighten in a way that was definitely not appropriate for someone she'd met 5 minutes ago. This is crazy, she whispered. Completely insane, he agreed. I have no idea how to be rich. I have no idea how to be married. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Alice could swear she felt something shift in the air between them, something dangerous and electric and absolutely terrifying. How much? She asked finally. Miller smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him it looked genuine. Enough to change your life. Oh, Miller. Teddy thought 3 floors below, watching the entertainment news website refresh with the first leaked photos of Miller Blackstone's secret wife. You have no idea what's coming. And neither, it turned out, did Alice. Alice Murphy stood in the middle of Bergdorf Goodman's private shopping floor, surrounded by enough designer dresses to fund a small country's education system, and wondered if this was what a nervous breakdown felt like. Absolutely not, she said for the 15th time in 20 minutes, backing away from a beaded Valentino gown that cost more than her parents' house. I look like I'm playing dress-up in my rich aunt's closet. You look stunning, Miller said, loosening his tie as he lounged in a velvet chair that probably cost more than most people's cars. For the past 3 hours, he'd been watching Alice try on increasingly expensive outfits, while fielding increasingly frantic calls from his PR team about the leaked wedding photos that were apparently breaking the internet. I look ridiculous, Alice insisted, catching her reflection in the 3-way mirror. The emerald silk Oscar de la Renta made her eyes look like jewels, but she felt like a fraud wrapped in beautiful lies. The green brings out your eyes, Miller observed, his voice softer than usual. Everything brings out my eyes when it costs $40,000. Vivian, their personal shopper, sighed dramatically. She'd been dressing Manhattan's elite for 30 years and had never encountered anyone who argued against looking magnificent. Darling, Vivian said in her perfectly cultivated accent, you're thinking like Alice Murphy, cleaning lady. Start thinking like Alice Blackstone, billionaire's wife. The name hit Alice like a physical blow. Alice Blackstone. It sounded like someone who summered in the Hamptons and had opinions about wine that didn't come from a box. I don't know how to be her, Alice whispered, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were attempting. Miller stood up and walked over to her, his reflection appearing behind hers in the mirror. For a moment they just looked at each other. Him in his perfectly tailored suit, her in enough silk and diamonds to buy a small yacht. Neither do I, he admitted quietly. I've never been married either. But you know this world, these people. And you know what it's like to work for something, to care about people who aren't useful to you. His hands settled gently on her shoulders. You know things I've never learned. The moment stretched between them, intimate and fragile, until Vivian cleared her throat. If you two are quite finished with your touching moment, we have a gala to prepare for. And Miller, your grandmother just called. She's moved up dinner to 6:30. What? Miller's hands tightened on Alice's shoulders. That gives us 40 minutes. Meanwhile, at the New York Herald's newsroom, Teddy Worthington III was having the time of his life. He'd managed to leak not just the photos, but also Alice's employment records, and the story was spreading faster than gossip at a high school reunion. "Billionaire's secret wife from mop to mogul," read the headline on his laptop screen. "Miller Blackstone's surprise marriage to cleaning lady shocks Manhattan elite." Perfect, Teddy thought, adjusting his bow tie in preparation for the gala. Now for phase 2. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Marcus, it's Teddy. Yes, I know it's been forever. Listen, you still work security at the plaza? Wonderful. I have a favor to ask." Back at Bergdorf's, Alice was experiencing what could only be described as a luxury-induced panic attack. "I can't do this," she said, sitting down heavily in the dressing room chair, still wearing the green dress. "Miller, I waitressed through college at Denny's. My idea of fine dining is Olive Garden. I don't know which fork to use or how to make small talk about stock portfolios." "The smaller fork is for salad," Miller said, sitting across from her in the small space. "Work from the outside in, and if anyone asks about stocks, just nod and say something about market volatility." "Market volatility," Alice repeated like a mantra. "As for the small talk," Miller paused, studying her face. "Just be yourself. Myself doesn't belong in your world. Maybe my world needs more people like yourself." Alice looked up at him, startled by the sincerity in his voice. "You don't even know me. I know you argue with charity when it's offered. I know you care more about doing a good job cleaning someone else's mess than most people care about their own success. I know you're brave enough to help a stranger even when it terrifies you." Their eyes met and held, and Alice felt that dangerous flutter in her chest again, the one that made her forget this was all pretend. "We should go," she said softly, breaking the spell. "Alice." Miller's voice stopped her as she reached for the dressing room curtain. "Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you're going to be the most beautiful woman at that gala." She turned to look at him, and something in his expression made her breath catch. He wasn't looking at her like she was a convenient solution to his problem. He was looking at her like she was extraordinary. "Miller?" "Yeah? Your middle name really is James, right? Because if I'm going to pretend to be married to you, I should probably know basic facts." He laughed. A real laugh, not the polished chuckle she'd heard him use with others. "Miller James Blackstone. Born October 30th, 1994. Graduated Harvard Business School magna cum laude. Has a scar on his left knee from falling off his bike when he was 7. Secretly likes romantic comedies but tells everyone he only watches documentaries." "Romantic comedies?" Alice couldn't help smiling. "The Princess Bride is a masterpiece, and I'll fight anyone who says otherwise." "Inconceivable," Alice said, mimicking the movie. "You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means," Miller quoted back, grinning. And there it was, their first real moment. Not Miller, the arrogant billionaire, and Alice, the hired help, but just two people who happened to love the same ridiculous movie, sharing a laugh in a dressing room that cost more per hour than most people made in a day. "We're really doing this," Alice said, more to herself than to him. "We're really doing this," Miller confirmed. 45 minutes later, they stood outside the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom, Alice's hand tucked into the crook of Miller's arm, both of them trying to ignore the photographers flashing cameras at them through the windows. "Ready?" Miller asked. Alice took a deep breath, channeling every romantic comedy heroine she'd ever admired. "Let's go be married." But as they stepped through the ornate doors into a room full of Manhattan's most powerful people, neither of them noticed Teddy Worthington III watching from across the room, his phone already in his hand, ready to execute the most deliciously destructive plan of his career. Showtime, Teddy thought with wicked glee. This is going to be absolutely spectacular. The game, as they say, was afoot. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom was exactly what Alice had expected from Manhattan's elite, obscenely opulent, intimidatingly beautiful, and filled with people who looked like they'd been personally crafted by expensive plastic surgeons and personal trainers. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow prisms across marble floors so polished Alice could see her reflection. Women in gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries glided between tables adorned with flower arrangements that probably required their own insurance policies, and every single person in the room was staring at them. "Smile," Miller murmured through his teeth, his hand warm and steady on the small of Alice's back. "You're supposed to be madly in love with me." "I'm supposed to be a lot of things I'm not," Alice whispered back, her cheeks aching from the fake smile she'd been wearing since they walked in. "Like rich and sophisticated, and not currently having a panic attack in front of 400 strangers." "Breathe," Miller instructed gently, and Alice realized she'd been holding her breath. "And remember, half these people are idiots who inherited their money, and the other half are pretending to be something they're not just as much as we are." Before Alice could respond, a woman in head-to-toe Chanel descended upon them like a perfectly coiffed vulture. "Miller Blackstone," she shrieked, air-kissing both his cheeks with the precision of a Swiss watch. "You naughty boy, getting married without telling anyone. I'm Bitsy Vanderberg, and I simply must hear everything about this whirlwind romance." Alice felt Miller tense beside her. "Bitsy, I'd like you to meet my wife, Alice." "Wife," Bitsy repeated, her eyes scanning Alice from head to toe with the efficiency of a price scanner. "How refreshing. And what did you say your maiden name was, dear?" "Murphy," Alice said, proud that her voice didn't crack. "Murphy," Bitsy mused. "Are those the Philadelphia Murphys, the Boston Murphys? I don't recall any Murphys in our usual circles." "The Queen's Murphys," Alice said, before she could stop herself. Miller's hand tightened on her back, but not in warning, in support. "Queens," Bitsy repeated, as if Alice had said, "Mars." "How eclectic." Across the room, Teddy Worthington III watched the interaction with the satisfaction of a chess master who'd just cornered his opponent's king. He'd been circulating for the past 20 minutes, dropping carefully placed hints about Miller's surprising marriage choice. Phase 2 is working beautifully, Teddy thought, sipping his champagne. Now for the grand finale. He caught the eye of his hired photographer, a paparazzi regular who specialized in catching celebrities in compromising positions, and gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the balcony. Meanwhile, Miller was navigating Alice through the social minefield with the skill of someone who'd been doing it his entire life. "Alice is being modest," he told the growing crowd of curious socialites. "She runs her own consulting business, very successful." "What kind of consulting?" asked Harrison Pemberton IV, a walking trust fund who'd never worked a day in his life. "Organizational efficiency," Alice said quickly, remembering Miller's earlier description. "I help people clean up their messes." "How fascinating," murmured Vivian Astor Clark, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "And how exactly did you two meet?" Alice's mind went blank. What had they said earlier? Coffee shop? Library? Elevator? "Starbucks," she blurted out. The crowd's silence was deafening. Miller jumped in smoothly. "Alice spilled coffee on me at the Starbucks in the Met. She was so flustered, trying to clean it up, that I couldn't help but ask her to dinner as compensation." "The Metropolitan Museum has a Starbucks?" Bitsy asked, clearly confused. "The MetLife building," Alice corrected quickly, earning a subtle squeeze of approval from Miller. "How romantic," Vivian said, the word dripping with barely concealed disdain. Just then, Josephine Blackstone appeared at Alice's elbow like a silk-wrapped hurricane. "Ladies, gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the conversation like a blade. "I hope you're not overwhelming my new granddaughter-in-law with questions. Alice is still adjusting to all the attention." The crowd dispersed with the speed of cockroaches when the lights come on, leaving Alice alone with Josephine and Miller. "You're doing well," Josephine said quietly, studying Alice with those sharp eyes. "Better than I expected." "Thank you?" Alice said uncertainly. "That wasn't necessarily a compliment, dear. I had very low expectations." Miller stepped closer to Alice, his arm sliding around her waist in a gesture that was becoming surprisingly natural. "Grandmother—" "Oh, relax, Miller. I'm simply observing." Josephine's smile was razor-sharp. "Alice, walk with me. I'd like to show you something." It wasn't really a request. Alice found herself being led through the crowd by Josephine, Miller trailing behind like a worried bodyguard. They stopped in front of a massive portrait hanging near the ballroom's entrance, a stern-looking man in a military uniform from what appeared to be the early 1900s. "My husband," Josephine said simply. "Miller's great-grandfather. He built this family's fortune from nothing. Started with a small steel company and turned it into an empire." Alice studied the painting, noting the man's determined jaw and calculating eyes, features she could see echoed in Miller's face. "He married above his station," Josephine continued conversationally. "A senator's daughter who thought she was slumming it with a working-class entrepreneur. She learned to love the life he gave her." The implication hung in the air like expensive perfume. "Of course," Josephine added, "she actually was in love with him, not just pretending to be." Alice's blood turned to ice water. "I'm sorry?" "Oh, my dear girl," Josephine laughed. "The sound like crystal breaking. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? I've been watching people lie to me for 89 years. I know the difference between genuine affection and whatever this is." Miller stepped forward, his face pale. "Grandmother, I can explain." "I'm sure you can, but first I'd like to hear from your charming wife." Josephine turned to Alice with predatory interest. "Tell me, dear, what exactly did my grandson offer you to participate in this little charade?" Alice felt the walls of the ballroom closing in around her. The music, the laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses. It all suddenly seemed impossibly loud. She started, then stopped. She could lie. She could continue the deception, play the part of the loving wife who'd married for love rather than money. But looking into Josephine's knowing eyes, Alice realized that the truth was the only thing that might save them now. "He offered me enough money to change my life," Alice said quietly. "And I said yes because I needed it. Because my father needs surgery we can't afford, and because I've been cleaning other people's messes for so long that I forgot I deserved better than just surviving." The honesty of her words seemed to surprise even herself. "But," Alice continued, her voice growing stronger, "he also offered me kindness when he didn't have to. He's been more considerate to me in one day than most people are in months. And maybe we're not really married, but the way he's protected me tonight, the way he's made me feel like I belong here even when I don't, that's real." She turned to look at Miller, whose expression had shifted into something intense and unreadable. "I may not love him," Alice said, her heart hammering against her rib. "But I could, and that terrifies me more than any amount of money you could take away from him." The silence that followed was profound enough to hear a pin drop in the next room. Josephine studied Alice for a long moment, then slowly began to smile. "Now that," she said approvingly, "was interesting." But before anyone could respond, Teddy Worthington III's hired photographer appeared at Alice's shoulder, camera flashing directly in her startled face. "Mrs. Blackstone," he shouted, "is it true you used to clean your husband's office building? Can you comment on reports that you've been lying about your background?" The ballroom erupted into chaos as more photographers materialized from seemingly nowhere, cameras clicking rapidly as guests pulled out their phones to record the spectacle. Alice stood frozen in the storm of flashing lights and shouted questions, feeling like a deer caught in the headlights of her own personal apocalypse. Miller's arm came around her like a shield, his body blocking her from the worst of the camera flashes. "Get us out of here," he said grimly to his security team, who appeared with impressive speed. But as they started pushing through the crowd toward the exit, Alice caught sight of Teddy Worthington III standing near the bar, raising his champagne glass to her in a mocking toast, his smile wide and absolutely delighted. Checkmate, Teddy thought with wicked satisfaction. Game over. Or so he thought. Miller's penthouse apartment at 3 a.m. was a stark contrast to the chaos they'd just escaped. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan's glittering skyline, but Alice couldn't focus on the beauty. She sat curled up on his Italian leather sofa, still wearing the emerald gown that now felt like a costume from someone else's life, scrolling through her phone with the morbid fascination of someone watching their own car crash in slow motion. Cinderella scandal, billionaire's fake wife exposed. She read aloud, her voice hollow. From rags to riches to ruins in 24 hours. They're really having fun with the headlines. Miller emerged from his kitchen carrying 2 mugs of coffee, having traded his tuxedo for dark jeans and a Harvard sweatshirt that made him look younger, more vulnerable, more human. "You don't have to read those," he said, setting her mug on the glass coffee table and settling beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, far enough away that it felt like a chasm. "Actually, I do," Alice said, taking a screenshot of a particularly vicious tweet. "TMZ is calling me the maid who played princess. The New York Post has a photo of me cleaning your office with the caption, 'From this to Mrs.' And someone on Twitter made a meme comparing me to Eliza Doolittle. Except instead of Professor Higgins, you're just a guy who hired a hooker." "Alice. Oh, and my personal favorite," she continued, her voice getting sharper with each word. "Page 6 interviewed 3 of your ex-girlfriends. Apparently I'm either a gold-digging opportunist with daddy issues or clearly pregnant and trapping him. They can't decide which narrative is juicier." Miller set down his coffee with more force than necessary. "None of that matters. Doesn't it?" Alice finally looked at him, and the pain in her green eyes hit him like a physical blow. "Miller, my picture is on the front page of 7 newspapers. My boss has already called to fire me. My neighbors are camping outside my apartment building with cameras. My life as I knew it is over." "I'll fix this," Miller said, leaning forward. "I'll pay for your father's surgery regardless. I'll set you up with a new identity if you want, a new apartment, a new—" "You'll pay me off," Alice interrupted. "Just like you tried to do this morning." "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" Alice stood up, pacing to the windows. The gown's train swept behind her like liquid emerald, and even in her anger, she was the most beautiful thing Miller had ever seen. "You're offering me money to make a problem go away. That's your solution to everything, isn't it?" Miller felt something twist in his chest, something uncomfortably close to shame. "I'm trying to help you. By treating me like a transaction." "That's not—" Miller stopped, the words dying in his throat because Alice was right and they both knew it. Alice turned back to face him, and her expression had shifted from anger to something worse. Disappointment. "You know what the really pathetic part is?" she said quietly. "For about 3 hours tonight I forgot this was fake. When you introduced me to those people, when you protected me from their questions, when you looked at me like I was actually worth something, I believed it. I believed you might actually see me as more than just a convenient solution to your inheritance problem." "Alice. But you don't, do you? I'm still just the cleaning lady you hired to play dress-up." Miller stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Then explain it to me," Alice challenged. "Tell me what I mean to you that isn't related to your grandmother's ultimatum." The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in his own penthouse, Teddy Worthington III was having the most delightful evening of his life. He'd opened a bottle of Dom Perignon 1996 to celebrate, and was currently composing what he considered to be a masterpiece of social media manipulation. His Instagram post was already going viral, a photo of himself at the gala with the caption, "When your Harvard roommate's marriage makes reality TV look classy, Millergate, fake it till you make it, social climber exposed." Beautiful, Teddy thought, watching the likes and comments pour in. By tomorrow, Miller will be the laughingstock of Manhattan, and Blackstone Industries' stock will tank. Grandmother Josephine will have no choice but to reconsider her inheritance plans. He pulled up his private messages and started typing a carefully crafted note to the Wall Street Journal's business section. After all, this scandal had serious financial implications. Phase 3 begins now, he mused with wicked satisfaction. Back in Miller's penthouse, Alice was gathering her purse, and the wrap Vivian had insisted went with the dress. "Where are you going?" Miller asked, panic creeping into his voice. "Home. Or what's left of it." Alice paused at the door. "Your grandmother was right, you know. About your great-grandfather's wife learning to love the life he gave her. The difference is, he actually loved her back. Alice, wait! But she was already gone, leaving Miller alone with the city lights and the crushing realization that somewhere between the morning's desperation and the evening's disaster, his fake wife had become the most real thing in his life. He pulled out his phone and dialed the one person who might be able to help him salvage this. Rebecca, I know it's 3 a.m. I need you to do something for me. 3 hours later, Alice Murphy sat in her tiny studio apartment in Queens, surrounded by newspapers with her face on them, watching the sunrise through windows that didn't offer million-dollar views. Her neighbors had finally given up their vigil around 4 a.m., but she knew they'd be back. Her phone had been ringing constantly. Reporters, talk show producers, even someone claiming to represent a reality TV show about regular people who marry rich. She'd turned it off after the 15th call. A soft knock at her door made her freeze. If it was another reporter, she might actually commit violence. Alice. A familiar voice called through the door. It's Rebecca, Miller's assistant. I'm alone and I brought coffee. Alice opened the door to find a woman in her 40s holding 2 Starbucks cups and wearing the most sympathetic expression Alice had seen since this nightmare began. Mr. Blackstone didn't send me, Rebecca said quickly. I came on my own. I thought you might want to know something about him that's not in the newspapers. Despite every instinct telling her to slam the door, Alice found herself stepping aside to let Rebecca in. Miller Blackstone is a lot of things, Rebecca said, settling on Alice's second-hand couch. Arrogant, demanding, sometimes completely oblivious to how normal people live. But he's also the only CEO I've ever worked for who knows the names of every janitor in his building. He personally paid for the night security guard's daughter's college tuition. And when the pandemic hit, he kept every single employee on payroll even when the board told him to cut costs. Alice took the coffee gratefully, inhaling the familiar comfort of caffeine. Why are you telling me this? Because, Rebecca said gently, in 15 years of working for him, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you last night. And I've never seen him panic about losing someone before. He's panicking about losing his inheritance. His inheritance was never really at risk, Rebecca said quietly. Josephine Blackstone would never actually disinherit her only heir. She's too practical for that. This whole marriage ultimatum was just her way of trying to force him to find someone who could make him happy. Alice set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. What are you saying? I'm saying that Miller chose you not because you were convenient, but because in 5 minutes of meeting you, you challenged him in ways no one ever has. You made him laugh. You made him think about someone other than himself. Rebecca stood up. And now he's about to do something either very stupid or very romantic, I'm not sure which. What do you mean? Rebecca smiled mysteriously. Check the news in about an hour. And Alice? Whatever you decide about him after that, just remember, some people are worth taking a chance on even when they're too stubborn to realize they're worth it themselves. After Rebecca left, Alice sat in her quiet apartment surrounded by the debris of her old life, and wondered if she had the courage to find out what Miller Blackstone was planning. Outside her window, the city was waking up to a new day, and somewhere in Manhattan, Miller was about to make a choice that would either destroy his carefully constructed world or transform it into something real. Game on, Alice thought, reaching for her phone to turn it back on. Whatever happened next, she wasn't going to miss it. Alice nearly choked on her coffee when she turned on the morning news and saw Miller Blackstone standing behind a podium in the lobby of his own building, facing a crowd of reporters with the calm determination of someone about to jump off a cliff. Ladies and gentlemen, Miller began, his voice carrying the authority that had built empires, I called this press conference to address the speculation surrounding my marriage. Alice grabbed her remote, turning up the volume with shaking hands. Behind Miller, she could see Rebecca and a handful of his executives looking like they were witnessing their boss's professional suicide in real time. Over the past 24 hours, there has been considerable discussion about my wife, Alice Murphy Blackstone, and the circumstances of our relationship. Let me be absolutely clear about the facts. Oh God, Alice thought. He's going to confess everything. He's going to destroy himself. First, Miller continued, looking directly into the camera as if he could see Alice through the screen. Alice Murphy is the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. She is intelligent, compassionate, brave, and honest to a fault. Qualities that are apparently so rare in my social circle that some of you find them suspicious. Alice set down her coffee cup before she dropped it. Second, yes, Alice worked as a cleaner in my building. She worked 2 jobs to support herself and her family, showed up every day with a smile, and did excellent work that most people wouldn't even notice. The fact that this is being used to shame her says far more about our society's priorities than it does about her character. In his own penthouse, Teddy Worthington III stopped mid-sip of his mimosa, his smile faltering as he watched his carefully orchestrated scandal take an unexpected turn. What the hell is he doing, Teddy thought, frantically reaching for his phone to call his media contacts. Third, Miller continued, his voice growing stronger. I am not going to dignify the suggestion that Alice is a gold digger with a response, because anyone who has spent 5 minutes with her would know that she argued with me for 20 minutes before accepting my help with anything. She has more integrity in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. Alice felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she couldn't tell if they were from relief or terror. Finally, Miller said, and his voice softened in a way that made Alice's heart skip, I want to address the question of whether our marriage is real. The press conference fell silent. Alice could hear her own heartbeat. Miller looked directly into the camera again. Alice, if you're watching this, and I hope you are, I need you to know something. What started as a business arrangement became the most real thing in my life. You challenged me, frustrated me, made me laugh, and forced me to become a better man than I ever thought I could be. You made me want to deserve you. Alice's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over despite her best efforts to hold them back. I know I hurt you, Miller continued, his voice breaking slightly. I know I made you feel like a transaction when you should have felt like a treasure. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. Because I love you, Alice Murphy. I love your terrible morning hair and your stubborn independence and the way you argue with compliments. I love how you make me want to be worthy of your smile. The reporters erupted into a frenzy of shouted questions, but Miller held up his hand for silence. One more thing, he said, pulling something from his pocket. Alice, I know we never got proper rings. I know we never had a proper proposal, so I'm asking you now in front of half of Manhattan and probably several news networks. Alice Murphy, will you marry me, for real this time? He held up a ring that even through the television camera was clearly stunning. A vintage Art Deco setting with a diamond that caught the morning light like captured starlight. I'll be waiting in Central Park, Miller said, at the bridge where they filmed You've Got Mail. You know, the one where Tom Hanks finally gets the girl. I'll wait there until you come, or until you don't. Either way, I needed you to know that you are not just a cleaning lady who helped me out of a jam. You are the woman who cleaned up my life. The press conference ended in chaos, but Alice barely noticed. She was staring at the television screen, her heart hammering so hard she was surprised it didn't show through her shirt. Her phone started ringing immediately, reporters no doubt wanting her reaction, but there was only one call she answered. Alice? It was Rebecca. Did you see? I saw, Alice whispered. He meant every word, Rebecca said gently. I've never seen him like this. He's been awake all night, pacing around his office, writing and rewriting what he wanted to say. He fired his PR team when they tried to talk him out of it. Rebecca, honey, I don't know what you're going to decide, but I will say this. That man just committed professional suicide on live television for you. He's going to lose clients. Board members are going to revolt, and his stock price is probably going to tank. But he didn't hesitate for a second. After Alice hung up, she sat in her tiny apartment staring at the television where news anchors were already dissecting Miller's declaration with the enthusiasm of medical examiners. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. Saw the news. He seems like a good man. But more importantly, are you happy? That's when Alice knew what she had to do. She looked in her tiny bathroom mirror at her reflection. No makeup, hair in yesterday's ponytail, wearing pajamas that had seen better years. She thought about the Alice who could transform into someone who belonged at galas, who could wear $40,000 dresses and argue with billionaires. But then she thought about Miller's face when he'd quoted The Princess Bride, the way he'd protected her from the photographers, how he'd said her name like it was something precious. She thought about the man who'd just destroyed his carefully controlled public image because he couldn't let her believe she wasn't worth fighting for. "Alice Murphy," she said to her reflection, "you're about to find out if fairy tales come true in Central Park." Meanwhile, at Bow Bridge in Central Park, Miller Blackstone stood in a $1,000 suit, holding a ring that cost more than most people's houses, wondering if the woman he loved would show up or if he'd just made the most expensive romantic gesture in history for an audience of joggers and tourists. "Please come," he thought, checking his watch for the 100th time. "Please give me a chance to prove that I can love you the way you deserve." And across Manhattan, Teddy Worthington III was having what could only be described as an epic meltdown as he watched his perfect plan backfire spectacularly. "This is not how this was supposed to go," Teddy raged, throwing his phone at the wall. Grand romantic gestures weren't part of the plan. Miller Blackstone doesn't do love. He does business. He does transactions. He doesn't do whatever this is. But as Teddy would soon learn, the heart has its own business plan. And Alice Murphy was about to make the biggest decision of her life. Bow Bridge in Central Park had never hosted a more unlikely fairy tale. Miller Blackstone stood at the center of the ornate cast-iron bridge, his Italian leather shoes planted firmly on ground that cost significantly less per square foot than his usual haunts. The October afternoon sun filtered through the autumn leaves, casting golden shadows across the lake below. But Miller barely noticed the scenery. His attention was fixed on every approaching figure, his heart jumping every time he caught a glimpse of brown hair or heard the click of heels on pavement. He'd been waiting for 2 hours. The ring box in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Behind him, he could hear the whispered conversations of tourists who'd recognized him from the morning's news coverage, their phones discreetly capturing what might be either the most romantic moment of the decade or the most public rejection in Manhattan history. "Do you think she'll show?" whispered a teenage girl to her friend, both of them pretending to read plaques while obviously watching Miller. "If she doesn't, can I marry him?" her friend whispered back. "Did you see that press conference? I literally swooned." Miller checked his Patek Philippe again, 3:47 p.m. Part of him wondered if Alice had even seen the news conference. Maybe she'd turned off her phone completely, fled the city, decided that a life of anonymity was worth more than whatever he could offer her. He wouldn't blame her. Meanwhile, Alice Murphy was having what could generously be called a fashion crisis in the bathroom of a Starbucks 6 blocks away from Central Park. She'd changed clothes 4 times, torn between wanting to look like she belonged in Miller's world and wanting to be authentically herself. She'd finally settled on a simple blue dress, the one she'd worn to her college graduation, the nicest thing she owned that didn't require a small mortgage to purchase. Her hands shook as she applied lipstick in the coffee shop's harsh fluorescent lighting. "This is insane," she muttered to her reflection. "He's probably already left. He's probably realized this whole thing is ridiculous and gone back to his real life with real socialites who know which fork to use for the fish course." But even as she tried to talk herself out of it, Alice knew she was going to Central Park, because despite everything, the lies, the chaos, the media circus, Miller Blackstone had looked into a television camera and told the world he loved her terrible morning hair, and she was pretty sure she loved him back. "Oh God," Alice thought, "I'm in love with Miller Blackstone. How did this happen?" 5 blocks away from the bridge, Teddy Worthington III was conducting what he privately considered to be a tactical regrouping session, but what everyone else would recognize as a complete mental breakdown. He'd called an emergency board meeting of Blackstone Industries' major shareholders, the same people who'd been texting him all morning about Miller's emotional instability and poor judgment. If he couldn't destroy Miller's personal life, maybe he could at least salvage his business coup. "Gentlemen," Teddy said to the assembled board members in the conference room of his father's investment firm, "I think we can all agree that Miller's behavior today demonstrates a concerning lack of judgment that calls into question his fitness to lead Blackstone Industries. Concerning? Huffed Harrison Pemberton Sr., a man who'd inherited his position and never let anyone forget it. The boy just committed professional suicide on live television. Our stock is down 12%. Exactly my point, Teddy said smoothly. Which is why I propose we call an emergency shareholder vote to remove Miller from his position as CEO. Perfect, Teddy thought with satisfaction. Even if his little romance works out, he'll still lose everything that actually matters. Money always wins in the end. But Teddy had made a crucial miscalculation. He'd forgotten about Josephine Blackstone. At that exact moment, Josephine was sitting in her Rolls-Royce outside Central Park, watching her grandson through binoculars like a military general surveying a battlefield. "Ma'am?" her driver asked carefully. "Should we approach?" "Absolutely not, Charles," Josephine said, adjusting the focus. "This is better than anything on television. Besides, I want to see what the girl does." Josephine had been watching the news coverage all morning with the satisfaction of someone whose 40-year plan was finally coming to fruition. She'd spent decades trying to find someone who could challenge Miller, who could make him think about something other than profit margins and stock prices. She'd just never expected that person to be a cleaning lady from Queens with magnificent timing and the courage to call her grandson an emotionally unavailable workaholic to his face. Smart girl, Josephine thought approvingly. Now let's see if she's brave enough to claim him. Back at Bow Bridge, Miller was beginning to seriously question his life choices. A group of NYU film students had set up nearby, apparently shooting a documentary about real love in the digital age, and he could hear them discussing whether his situation was authentically romantic or an example of toxic masculinity disguised as grand gesture. He was leaning toward the latter. "Sir?" A small voice interrupted his brooding. Miller looked down to see a girl who couldn't have been more than 10, wearing a Yankees cap and holding a hot dog. "Are you the guy from the news? The one waiting for his wife?" "I am," Miller said, managing a smile despite his growing certainty that Alice wasn't coming. "My mom says you're either really romantic or really stupid," the girl informed him matter-of-factly. "Your mom might be right on both counts," Miller admitted. "She also says that if a boy ever loves me enough to embarrass himself on TV, I should probably marry him." Miller laughed despite himself. "Your mom sounds like a smart woman." "She is. She also says—" The girl stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she looked past Miller toward the bridge's entrance. "Oh my God." Miller spun around, and his heart stopped. Alice Murphy was walking toward him across Bow Bridge, and she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Not because of her dress, though the simple blue made her eyes look like emeralds, but because of the expression on her face. Nervous, determined, hopeful, and absolutely radiant. She stopped about 10 feet away from him, close enough that he could see her hands shaking, far enough away that the space between them felt like an ocean. "Hi," Alice said softly. "Hi," Miller replied, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't expected. "So," Alice continued, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "I hear you're looking for a wife." "I am," Miller said, taking a step closer. "But I should warn you, the position comes with some significant drawbacks. The guy's kind of arrogant. He's terrible at expressing emotions, and he just destroyed his professional reputation on live television." "Sounds like a disaster," Alice said, taking her own step forward. "What are the benefits?" "He loves the Princess Bride," Miller offered, moving closer still. "He knows all the janitors' names, and he's completely, hopelessly, devastatingly in love with a woman who's too good for him but might, if he's very lucky, love him back." "That last part does sound appealing," Alice admitted, close enough now that Miller could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "Alice," Miller said seriously, pulling the ring box from his pocket, "I need you to know that this isn't about the inheritance anymore. This isn't about my grandmother's ultimatum or saving face or any of that. This is about the fact that I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me? For real this time?" Alice looked at the ring. It was stunning, clearly expensive, but somehow not ostentatious. It looked like something that belonged on her hand. "Miller," she said softly, I have something to tell you first. Miller's heart stopped. This is it. This is where she says no. I love you too, Alice continued, and Miller felt like he could breathe again. I love how you protect people who work for you. I love how you quoted The Princess Bride in a business meeting. I love how you made me feel like I was worth something even when I didn't believe it myself. Is that a yes? Miller asked, barely daring to hope. That's a yes, Alice laughed, tears streaming down her face as Miller slipped the ring onto her finger. But I have one condition. Anything, Miller said, pulling her into his arms. We're having a real wedding this time. None of this fake stuff. Deal, Miller laughed, spinning her around as the crowd of tourists, film students, and curious onlookers erupted into applause. As they kissed on Bow Bridge with the autumn sun setting behind them and the sound of cheering filling the air, neither of them noticed Josephine Blackstone climbing out of her Rolls-Royce with a satisfied smile. And neither of them saw Teddy Worthington III receiving a phone call that would inform him that Josephine had just called an emergency board meeting of her own, one where she planned to discuss the future of anyone foolish enough to challenge her grandson during the happiest day of his life. Game, set, and match, Josephine thought with wicked satisfaction. Welcome to the family, Alice Murphy Blackstone. But that, as they say, is a story for another day. For now, there was just Miller and Alice, a ring that fit perfectly, and the kind of love that makes people believe in fairy tales. Even in Manhattan. 6 months later, the Blackstone Industries boardroom had never hosted a more entertaining coup attempt, and Josephine Blackstone had never enjoyed a business meeting more in her 89 years. Gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been terrifying grown men since before some of them were born. I understand you've called this meeting to discuss my grandson's fitness to lead this company. Teddy Worthington III sat at the opposite end of the mahogany table, surrounded by the shareholders he'd convinced to support his takeover bid. 6 months of watching Miller's happiness had driven Teddy to increasingly desperate measures, culminating in this last-ditch effort to seize control of Blackstone Industries. With all due respect, Josephine, Teddy said, his Harvard-educated smoothness barely concealing his desperation. Miller's erratic behavior and poor judgment have cost this company millions. Our stock took a significant hit after his public romantic display. Ah, yes, Josephine smiled like a shark scenting blood. Let's discuss those numbers, shall we? She nodded to Rebecca, who was standing by with a presentation that looked suspiciously well prepared for a supposedly emergency meeting. Since Miller's engagement to Alice, Rebecca began, clicking to the first slide, Blackstone Industries has seen a 43% increase in positive media coverage, a 28% rise in employee satisfaction scores, and our stock price has reached an all-time high. The shareholders looked confused. This wasn't the narrative Teddy had been feeding them. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, clearly enjoying herself, Miller's authentic approach to leadership has attracted 3 major new clients who specifically cited his refreshing honesty and genuine character as deciding factors in choosing Blackstone Industries. Teddy's perfectly practiced smile began to crack. But the initial scandal generated more positive publicity than any marketing campaign we've ever run, Josephine interrupted smoothly. It turns out, Theodore, that people respond quite favorably to authentic love stories. Who would have thought? This is not happening, Teddy thought frantically. This was supposed to be my moment of triumph. But his moment of triumph was rapidly becoming his moment of reckoning. There is, however, Josephine continued, her voice taking on a decidedly Arctic tone, the matter of corporate espionage, media manipulation, and deliberate sabotage that needs to be addressed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. I have no idea what you're suggesting, Teddy said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Don't you? Josephine pulled out a folder thick enough to choke a horse. Security footage of you meeting with photographers, phone records showing your communications with gossip columnists, financial records showing payments to various media outlets. Really, Theodore, for someone with an Ivy League education, you left quite the paper trail. The shareholders were staring at Teddy now with the expression people usually reserved for discovering something unpleasant on their shoe. "The board has unanimously voted," Josephine announced with obvious satisfaction, "to permanently ban you from any involvement with Blackstone Industries, to pursue legal action for corporate sabotage, and to make sure that every reputable business in Manhattan knows exactly what kind of character you possess." Teddy's face had gone the color of cottage cheese. "You can't do this to me." "Actually," said a familiar voice from the doorway, "she can." Miller Blackstone entered the boardroom like he owned it, which, technically, he did. But there was something different about him now, something relaxed and confident that hadn't been there 6 months ago. He was still wearing $1,000 suits, but he looked happy. Behind him walked Alice, radiant in a simple cream-colored dress that probably cost less than any of the board members' ties, but made her look like she belonged exactly where she was. Her engagement ring caught the light as she slipped her hand into Miller's. "Teddy," Miller said conversationally, "I'd like you to meet my wife. Actually, she has something to say to you." Alice stepped forward, and for a moment, Teddy thought she might actually apologize, might try to smooth things over with feminine diplomacy. He was spectacularly wrong. "Theodore Worthington III," Alice said, her voice carrying a strength that could cut glass. "You tried to destroy the man I love because you couldn't handle the fact that he found happiness you'll never have. You're pathetic, petty, and frankly, a little sad. I almost feel sorry for you." "Almost?" Teddy croaked. "Almost," Alice confirmed with a smile that was pure sunshine mixed with steel. "But then I remember that you tried to hurt Miller, and my sympathy disappears completely." She turned to the rest of the board. "Gentlemen, Miller Blackstone is the best CEO this company has ever had. He's also the kindest, most ethical, most genuinely decent man I've ever met. If you're too stupid to recognize that, then you deserve whatever mediocre leadership you get after you lose him." The silence that followed was so complete that the ticking of the boardroom clock sounded like thunder. "Well," Josephine said finally, her voice warm with approval, "I can see why Miller chose you, my dear." 3 hours later, Miller and Alice sat on the couch in their new apartment. A perfect compromise between Miller's penthouse lifestyle and Alice's need for a space that felt like home. The walls were covered with photographs from their real wedding. A small ceremony in Alice's family church in Queens, followed by a reception in Central Park where they'd served pizza and played The Princess Bride on a projection screen. "So," Alice said, curled up against Miller's side, "how does it feel to completely humiliate your Harvard roommate in front of the entire Manhattan business community?" "Honestly?" Miller grinned, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Pretty amazing. But not as amazing as this." "What?" "Sitting on our couch eating takeout Chinese food?" "Being married to you," Miller said simply. "Being happy. Being normal." Alice looked up at him with those green eyes that still made his heart skip. "Miller Blackstone, you will never be normal." "Thank God," Miller laughed. "Normal sounds boring." "It is," Alice agreed, stealing a piece of his lo mein. "But you know what's not boring?" "What?" "The fact that you just quoted You've Got Mail during a board meeting today." "I did not quote You've Got Mail. I wanted it to be you. I wanted it to be you so badly," Alice recited in a perfect imitation of Miller's voice. "You said that to me when we were leaving the boardroom." "That doesn't count," Miller protested, but he was smiling. "That was a private moment. A private moment that Rebecca filmed for the company newsletter." "She did not." "She absolutely did. It's going to be the lead story. CEO quotes rom-com, stock prices soar." Miller groaned, but he was laughing. "My professional reputation is never going to recover." "Good," Alice said, settling back against his chest. "I like you better without the professional reputation. I like you better just being you. Even with my terrible morning hair? Especially with your terrible morning hair." Erko. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of Manhattan twinkle outside their windows. Alice's simple engagement ring caught the light, and Miller still couldn't quite believe she'd said yes. "Alice?" he said softly. Do you ever miss it? Your old life? Alice considered this seriously. I miss the simplicity sometimes. I miss knowing exactly who I was and where I belonged. But Miller? Yeah? I wouldn't trade what we have for all the simplicity in the world. You didn't just give me a new life, you gave me a life where I get to be completely myself and be loved for it. That's worth all the confusion and chaos and media attention in the world. Miller felt his chest tighten with emotion. I love you, Alice Murphy Blackstone. I love you too, Miller James Blackstone. Even when you quote romantic comedies during hostile takeover attempts. It was a corporate coup, not a hostile takeover. Same difference. It's really not. Alice silenced him with a kiss that tasted like Chinese food and forever, and Miller decided that maybe being wrong wasn't such a bad thing when it meant being wrong with her. Meanwhile, across town, Teddy Worthington III was packing his office, his career in ruins, his reputation destroyed, facing lawsuits from 3 different directions. But as he watched the news coverage of Miller and Alice's happiness, he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, he'd been fighting the wrong battle all along. Some people, Teddy thought with surprising clarity, really do deserve their happy endings. And in her penthouse apartment, Josephine Blackstone poured herself a glass of champagne and toasted a photograph of her late husband. We did it, darling, she said to the picture. We found him someone who makes him happy. Someone who makes him better. Someone who loves him enough to fight for him. She looked out at the city lights, at the empire her family had built, at the legacy that would now continue with love at its foundation instead of just ambition. Now that, Josephine murmured with deep satisfaction, is how you write a proper ending. And in apartments and penthouses across Manhattan, in Queens and Brooklyn and the Bronx, people were falling asleep to a love story that had started with 5 minutes of desperation and ended with a lifetime of happiness. Because sometimes, when you're brave enough to take a chance on love, love is brave enough to take a chance on you. Even in Manhattan. The end.